Now for tonight's presentation will be by Matt Windle. So Matt Windle is a research scientist and program lead of research and technical services at the River Institute. Matt leads research projects including studies of fish communities, contaminants in sediment and fish, eutrophication, habitat restoration, impacts of water level management, coastal wetlands, and the use of new emerging tools such as environmental DNA and drones. A meaningful part of his work has been partnering with Indigenous organizations to support environmental goals, collaborating with researchers from universities and government agencies, and communicating science to the public. Matt also leads instruction for several courses of the Environmental Technician program at SLC in Cornwall. Originally from Northern Canada, Matt received his bachelor's in environment science from Queen's University and his master's in biology from Memorial University in Newfoundland. So without further ado, I'd like to bring Matt Windle to the front.
Thanks, Casey. Thanks everybody for coming, and really happy to share some exciting recent projects we have going at the River Institute. I'm sort of just a spokesperson for all these projects because they're really big group efforts, and it's really nice to see a lot of the people in the room here that have been part of those projects as well. So think of me that way, and I'm a fish ecologist by training. I've been able to learn lots of things along the way with different tools. Casey was mentioning things like drones, and we're now using environmental DNA. I'll kind of get into that a little bit, but keep in mind that if there could be things about the projects I discussed that I might kind of point you in other directions or other contacts if I feel like they have more expertise on some of the elements I'll be talking about today. Am I kind of is this okay here, Zach? Or I don't want to block the screen. I have a giant head, so I don't want to block. Is here okay? Okay, I'll go here. All right. So yes, we kind of came up with this title of Reviving the River's Edge because I'll be talking about some restoration programs and projects in particular, and had a nice cadence to it. I keep reading that as Revving the River's Edge, which is not correct, but I have to keep correcting myself. So just to position us, this is the Great Lakes, and for this talk I'll be focusing on the upper St. Lawrence River. So that's that highlighted box right there, if you can see that. And again, just as a reminder, the Great Lakes, one of the largest freshwater ecosystems on the planet, and the St. Lawrence River is the outflow of this whole system. So it's a really interesting place to work. There's a lot of population that lives around the Great Lakes, millions and millions of people. And so it's a large focus of development and usage. So it's a really good place to think about restoration. It's not really a place that's remote and not experiencing these types of pressures that I'll go over. If we zoom in on the upper St. Lawrence River, it's actually divided into different sections. So these sections, we can think of them as the beginning section of the St. Lawrence River. As it outflows, the St. Lawrence River is 1,000 islands. There's actually over 1,000 islands in that section. Beautiful. If anyone has ever been there, you know what we're talking about. But very kind of lots of islands and bays, and it has very unique kind of types of habitat there. Then you get into what's called the middle corridor. So it's a very narrow corridor. There's not as many islands. It's very kind of rapid flow through. Then you get into the Lake St. Lawrence section, which is also the headwater of the Moses Saunders Dam. And this is an area that was had, when the Moses Saunders Dam was constructed, over 200% increase in surface area of freshwater upstream of the dam. So, it's sort of considered a fluvial lake in there. And, we have the Long Sault Parkway, for example, which is a beautiful component of that. And then downstream of Cornwall, we have Lake St. Francis. We have Akwesasne in this section, and this is a large widening of the river. We have many different islands. On the Quebec side, there's lots of shoreline development with housing and things like that. The north side also has lots of development, and we have lots of agriculture, for example, land usage. And then we have, and then it flows into sort of the confluence of the Ottawa River near Montreal. So we think about the river, but it's really these different dynamic components and compartments and different types of habitats, and they each have their own unique different pressures because of that. I like to show this, this video. This is a lot of drone video that we've collected over the years of just the beauty of the diversity of habitats of the St. Lawrence River. And it's, you know, we're talking about a river that essentially came into fruition about 10,000 years ago at the retreat of the glaciers. And, you know, for millennia, Indigenous people were here using the land. And then more recently, in the last couple hundred years, we've had very rapid development and changes in the habitats. And, you know, that's created a lot of different pressures. So really just kind of nice visuals to help set the scene there. These habitats, in particular the near-shore habitats of the St. Lawrence River, are home to the highest diversity within all the river. Over 90% of the roughly 80 fish species that are in the river inhabit at some point in their life cycle the near-shore environments. And you can see some examples here. Again, this is just different fish species that we filmed over the years. And really beautiful diversity. Even large fish that we like to think of as sport fish, most of those start their life cycles in the near-shore environments as small fish, right? So really important, and this is really the area where we have the most impacts from, you know, from land use and human development and activities, is these near-shore environments. That's a bowfin, dad protecting his young. And I don't know how many fish you can identify as we go along here, largemouth bass. But most of the fish you can come across. So if you're going to study the health of the St. Lawrence River, focusing on the nearshore environments makes the most sense because you're going to get the most diversity in these areas. And I could keep showing you tons of videos, you know, birds and reptiles and amphibians. They all have the highest diversity in these nearshore habitats. Lots of different stressors are affecting the St. Lawrence River. And this is not just the St. Lawrence River, it's most major rivers now in the world, unfortunately. And I've kind of categorized these in these different themes, I guess we would say. So, you know, in terms of hydrological and physical stressors, we have things like flow regulation, right? If we have dams in the river, they can regulate the flow. We have shoreline erosion. So things, you know, wakes from ships, for example, that might be coming a little too close to shore can create too much energy on the shoreline and erode it. Ice regime changes. It's warming up. We have less ice. Maybe not this year. It's quite cold, but in previous years, we've had no ice on the St. Lawrence River. And, you know, that creates opportunity for more wave action in the winter. And you could have severe storm events, for example, that you wouldn't normally have if the surface of the river was covered in ice. And then sediment alteration as well, just increased flow of sediments into the system. Another theme could be, you know, navigation and infrastructure. So I mentioned ships coming by, creating wakes. And I put a video here. This is one we recorded while we were doing a survey at one of the islands in the St. Lawrence River that's very close to the shipping lane. And just to set the context, a ship has just gone by and they pull and push a lot of water as they move. So they displace a lot of water. And you can see the crew is just trying to do some fishing there with the seine net. And now you can see that the wake, the passage of the ship is now coming in. And it's almost like a really rapid tide coming in. So this type of action is happening over and over and over again as ships come by. And you can see now the water was drawn out and now it's coming right in. And we're panicking a little bit. I always joke I had to turn the volume off this because I'm kind of swearing at this point because I realize our gear is about to get flooded and Emma's there scrambling to grab our drone before it gets flooded. But you know, we experience this if we're really close to the shipping lane. So it's something that happens again all across the river and locations that are close, and maybe some of you have observed that as well. But we have lots of, you know, ports and industrial structuring along the river too, so that kind of hardens the shorelines. And then we have bridges and causeways, which can change the flow of water as well through the river. And in particular, shoreline armoring. So I'm going to show a slide coming up of what's happening with that. Water quality as well, another stressor, right? So we just have, at the River Institute, we study lots of contaminants in the ecosystem in partnership with lots of other people. So that's things like legacy contaminants from industrial activities in Cornwall. But we also have things, lots of effluents. There's a lot of research and work on addressing eutrophication, which is just the just kind of too many nutrients in the river that can cause things like this. And this photo is showing a really nice example of an algal bloom that's set off by too much nutrients coming in. And then some other things that we're keeping in mind now, kind of emerging concerns like microplastics and emerging contaminants like PFAS, for example. So I don't mean to stress everyone out with all these stressors, but it's good to kind of layer all this together, right? Because then this sets the context of why we need to do these types of restoration projects. So some more stressors that we also deal with at the River Institute and other organizations do, for example, loss and degradation of wetlands. Wetlands are the most diverse habitats of the system. They have the highest biodiversity. So they're really important to maintain. They also have, they offer all these different functions in terms of, flood management and water clarity, things like that. We have lots of new invasive species. The St. Lawrence River Great Lakes system is one of the most heavily invaded systems on the planet in terms of invasive species. If anyone's ever seen a round goby, you know what I'm talking about. They weren't here 25 years ago, and now they're one of the most common species in the river. So there's new fish showing up, there's new plants coming in. So we have to be vigilant because they change the functioning of the ecosystem and energy pathways and things like that. And then, of course, as we develop more and more habitat, we're kind of fragmenting what we have left, and that can affect different populations. Land use, of course, is really important. We're kind of focusing on the water part here, but as you move away from the water, lots of different land uses can still impact what's happening in the water through runoff for agriculture, non-point source nutrients, for example, and runoff, and just really focusing on development as well. This is a picture that was taken, I think, in 2018, I want to say. This is just in Hoople Bay, but you can see sometimes water level variability can be quite extreme, especially upstream of the Moses Saunders Dam, due to different regulations that are in place or just regimes that are being implemented. So in this case, this section can sometimes be experience really high water level fluctuations, and you'd have these huge expanses of river bottom exposed. And of course, people see this and they're concerned and they want to know what the impacts are. So we've done a number of studies on that as well. The climate is warming. We have successful years of record temperatures, and that means that the river water temperatures are also increasing. So we're trying to monitor that as well. And things like fish, they're dependent on water. So much like we have these different thermal regimes where humans are comfortable living, fish have that same restriction too. And certain species are really intolerant of really warm water. So as the water kind of warms, it can kind of really narrow their available habitat, for example. And then storm intensity, it's the last couple of years, everyone's been talking about it. We don't have as much regular precipitation, for example, but we might have very extreme events that we're experiencing. So just, an inundation of water sometimes where you might have more regular inputs. This, I came across this. This is from the Great Lakes. This is from a collaboration of different organizations, but it's a Great Lakes Aquatic Habitat Framework. And they drew in various different data sets in the US and Canada and put together this hardened versus natural shoreline layer for the Great Lakes. So I've just kind of zoomed in on this for the eastern portion of Lake Ontario, as well as the upper St. Lawrence River. And there's two colors to pay attention to. There's orange, which is the natural shoreline that they've classified. And then they have in red hardened shoreline. So this is anywhere where there's been artificial hardening of the shoreline to prevent erosion or just to put in different structures. So when you look at the upper St. Lawrence River, it's between 25 and 30% hardened. And this data set was from 2019. So it's, I think we could probably safely say that it's increased a little bit since then too. I know just from being out on the river, I've seen lots of developments since 2019. And then we're going to zoom in on this section here, just kind of by Cornwall and Akwesasne and Lake St. Francis. And certain sections actually have much higher shoreline hardening percentages. So again, look at the red here in this picture, right? So this is Lake St. Francis, where a huge percentage of that shoreline has been hardened. And we do see areas that are really nice. So I've highlighted in this, the kind of light green color shows some very significant wetlands in the area. And again, you see those are kind of the areas where you don't have that shoreline hardening. So that's, again, a really good reason to protect wetlands and, encourage conservation in those areas. But a lot of the Akwesasne Islands as well do not have this hardening. So that's probably why when we're out and about doing survey work and things like that, that we really enjoy being in those areas. So this is pretty significant. We're having we're having natural shoreline disappear, right? And this could be for a variety of reasons, there's, going back hundreds of years, there's been different techniques developed for shoreline hardening and engineering solutions, and these have been, more short-term solutions. This is from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration website. This is their Habitat Blue project, and they've just kind of classified here different types of approaches people can use to make more resilient shorelines. So we have on your left there the green softer techniques. This is where we have what we call living shorelines, and this kind of a gradient of the kind of the greenest all the way to the they call it gray harder techniques, but the most altered shoreline types. So on the far left here we have just vegetation only. You might have seen those in some areas. And then we can start adding different techniques, right? So just an edge along the base. This is for light erosion, so maybe not super large wave action, but it's still enough to kind of prevent erosion. And then you can have things like sills, and then you can install breakwaters a little bit further offshore just to kind of dissipate the wave energy. And then we have things like riprap here. So that's kind of a slope that has lots of large rocks or other debris that's kind of placed on that slope, and that's really a very common technique around. And then we have things like bulkheads or walls that are just kind of these flat, walls that are implemented. Really good for, short-term solutions for high erosion locations, but there's a trade-off, right? That we're moving away from these green shorelines, and so if you're a homeowner and this you've implemented one of these solutions, or maybe you purchased a property that has one of these more gray techniques, you might be experiencing not too much erosion on your property, but you might be missing a lot of the benefits on this end of the scale here, and I'll kind of go over some of those benefits. So we know anyone can do this. Go put your face underwater at a natural habitat with plants, and then you'll see this, right, in the river. This is everywhere. If you put plants in the river, fish will show up because they need that structure. Little fish like this, I think these are mostly blunt-nosed minnows, one of the most common minnow species in the river, but they need this kind of structure, right? Small fish like hiding in it. Large fish use it for hunting and spawning and other things. So we see the really strong evidence for benefits of that type of thing. And people have done studies on this. You don't just have to take my word for it. You can look this up yourself. Scientific studies looking at the benefits of natural shorelines and habitats that have more structure to them, natural structure. So there's some examples listed here where they've correlated, if you improve the shoreline vegetation, for example, the aquatic habitat next to that shoreline will be significantly improved. You'll see benefits in terms of the amount of fish that show up, the species richness, the number of species that are there. And there's just lots of studies that have kind of shown this direct linkage between improving shorelines and what you see in the water, the benefits that way. And just some examples, these are just photos we've taken over the years at different locations. The top one there is the Salmon River mouth, so beautiful natural wetland habitat, no artificial structures anywhere in sight, lots of natural woody vegetation submerged. And then we have another embayment here next to an agricultural field. Still fairly natural, but there's potentially some erosional effects happening here. And then we have, much more artificial shorelines and hardened shorelines in this case. And, at this location in particular, we see, just from having done surveys, a pretty low diversity of species. It's also really rough trying to do surveys in more developed places too, as anyone that's helped out with that knows. So all these stressors are happening in the St. Lawrence River. We have this history, this natural history, the more recent impacts over the last couple hundred years of kind of all these different stressors and developments. And then so there's a really big need for collecting baseline information about what's out there right now. What is the condition of the St. Lawrence River? What species live where? Do we see any relationships between natural habitats and certain fish assemblages, groups of fish that are commonly found at these locations? Vice versa, if we go to really developed shorelines, do we see a lack of species lack of diversity, impacts of erosion, things like that. So I'm going to kind of talk about a project that we've been working on over many years that's been helping to collect information on this. And then I'll transition to several projects that we've built upon this project using the data set and everything that we've learned through this project. So the one I want to talk about is, I don't know if you've maybe heard me talk about this before, but it's the FINS project. So the Fish Identification Near Source Survey, or we just abbreviate to FINS. And this is an amazing partnership between the River Institute and the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne's Environment Program staff. And this is started way back in 2015. So we just completed our 11th field season together for this project. And back then, this is Henry Lickers. He was the former director of the Environment Program. And, we were having talks about different projects. And Henry just kind of brought up, there's some concern in the community about lack of information about small fish populations. There's lots of government programs looking at surveys of sport fish, for example, but there just really wasn't as much information on small fish populations in Akwesasne and the local area. So we said, okay, we'll put together a project. We'll put together this ragtag team here. There was 4 of us at the time. Had much darker hair again back then, but there was just 4 of us to start. So we did a summer. We kind of got a net. We got a pretty, a water quality meter. We consulted with a few other groups that were doing similar surveys much further away and kind of learned from them about what techniques they were using. And we came along there. So that's myself and Tyler and Jolux and Jenny there. So cut to 11 years later, and our team has grown massively. I think there's over 20 of us now, if you count everyone up, and so many more collaborators and that have joined this team too. Again, at the core of it, this co-knowledge production of the Institute and the MCA's Environment Program staff together, kind of, focusing on areas that are important to us, but really expanding the coverage. And we've brought on all kinds of different collaborators over the years too, and I've just kind of listed some of them here. I couldn't put all of them on the slide here. There's another one here of all the different organizations that have provided funding too. So it's really grown over the years. So what is this project? What are we messing around in the river? So we started just looking, as I mentioned, with fish surveys and then water quality. What's the water temperature? What fish live here? What's the shoreline kind of look like? And then over the years, we kind of added more and more and more components to that. So we started doing plant surveys at all the places that we visit. We started taking nutrient samples, so looking at phosphorus and nitrates. Those drive algal blooms, for example. Collect those at all of our sites. We started to use drones, for example. I'll show that. And then we were most recently collecting environmental DNA, and that's led to some really exciting developments at the River Institute. So here's a picture just showing the team out using a seine net. That's kind of this large length of net. It's a panel. You just do a standardized length along the shore and count the fish, identify them, measure them, and put them back in the water. As I mentioned, we do lots of water quality, so we have instruments to take the temperature and the amount of oxygen in the water, which is important. And again, we're relating all these variables to what fish and what animals we find in the river. We're also doing aquatic vegetation. So vegetation, I showed you that video where all the fish are kind of swimming throughout it. So some fish really prefer certain types of vegetation. So we take these standardized surveys using this quadrat, it's called, that square, and we measure all the different plants along different transect lengths at all our sites. This is our old drone. We're getting a new drone, but this is a really cool technique where you can use drones and fly them over your habitat. You can get these overhead shots of your habitat. You can actually turn your drone imagery into models. You can manipulate those and play around with them too, like that. So that's really cool. And actually, if you zoom in here, you can see our seine tracks through the vegetation there. So really high resolution. And you can look at this year after year. You can go back and say, okay, what is the vegetation like this year? And it does change from year after year. For example, in low water versus high water years, or temperatures could affect that as well. Really cool to start this collaboration with Dr. Stephen Lougheed at Queen's University back in 2019, and we started implementing it in 2020. Steve, amongst other things, he's a herp biologist, but he's also an expert at eDNA. So we were visiting Queens, and he said, have you considered using that in your project? And we said, no. Can you help us? And he said, sure. So he kind of, through him and his students, they helped set us up with the different techniques and tools we needed to do that. And it looks a lot like this, where you just collect water samples in bottles like this, and you scoop them up. And then, of course, you're being very careful you don't contaminate. So lots of gloves, and we use so much bleach, big bleach budget. But you have to sterilize everything you're doing because the amounts of DNA floating in the water are minuscule. So the slightest little strand of DNA, if we can capture that in one of these bottles, we can bring it back to the lab, and through a technique called PCR, polymerase chain reaction, we can actually replicate and replicate and replicate that tiny little bit of DNA until it's much, much more DNA. And then we can screen that basically like a barcode against known sequences of DNA of different species, and then we can kind of see what was in that water. So it's kind of an emerging tool that a lot of government agencies and universities are using now. And we're actually, and we've mentioned this before, but the River Institute is, through a really great collaboration with Queen's University, we've expanded our capacity to do this at the River Institute through construction of new eDNA dedicated laboratories. So that actually should be opening later this year. And we're excited to, again, work with our partners and everyone else to do training and kind of expand that, the use of that tool. So lots of different, as I mentioned, lots of different opportunities there. So we started in 2015. It's 2026 now. Time flies, but when you put it all on a map, it kind of looks like this. All those red points are all the locations that the River Institute and the MCA have visited over the years. So it's over 240 sites now. So we have this massive, massive data set. This is one of the most unique data sets for the Upper St. Lawrence River now. It not only includes fish, but all the different things I mentioned that we're measuring, like water quality and nutrients. We have really nice overhead views of the habitats as well. So we have a pretty good sense now, after doing all this work, that we can sort of predict what we should find different habitats. And one of my favorite examples, I forgot to put a slide on this, but when we see lily pads and tape grass, which is a long kind of strand, long-leafed plant, when we see that, we generally kind of think we're going to find a long-nosed gar, for example, which is a really cool, fun fish because they tend to like that combo. But you can make that kind of prediction for lots of other different species. So in the top here, you have an example of a wetland, and you see those different lily pads floating on the top there. On the bottom, you have a rocky shoreline. We visit these types of habitats over and over again throughout the river. And when you visit them, you tend to see the same types of fish show up. So in the wetland, you have a lot of things like these sunfish, for example, pumpkin seed and bluegills, and black crappies, which is an awesome fish name. And then on the rocky shorelines, you see lots of different minnow species, for example. So you can see these kind of patterns over and over and over again. In some cases, we visit habitats and we don't see what we expect to see, though. So in those cases, we think to ourselves, why are those fish not here? And then we start to look at other changes in the habitat, right? It could be a shoreline that's heavily developed, or the water quality could be much worse, or there could be not as much oxygen, things like that. So this does happen where we visit a site and we don't see these fish. And then we have to sort of do some analysis on that. This project has generated one of the largest distribution maps for different species of the river, invasive species, as well as these types of species of risk. So at the top there, that's a pug-nosed shiner, has a tiny, tiny little mouth, but it's a species of risk, and it's fairly rare in the river. The middle one here is a cutlet minnow, and you might have heard Dr. Brian Hickey talk about them before, but Brian studied those a lot in Rotary Creek. Really cool species. They have this trilobe lower jaw. They can pick up rocks with it and build nests. And that's because they build the nests. We've actually used that with one of our restoration projects I'll talk about. But another use they do with their trilobe jaw is they pick out the eyes of fish they don't like. So if you see a fish missing an eye, you know a cutlet minnow is probably around somewhere. And this is a really small cousin of a northern pike and muskellunge, the grass pickerel, which likes to hang out in grass in wetlands. So we've created a really nice database of where we should find these species of risk. And we're also mapping the distribution of a lot of invasive species. You'll notice round goby here, and probably a lot of people have seen that one, but there's some newer invasive species. This top one here, the tube-nosed goby, the last 8 years has spread through the entire Upper St. Lawrence River. So when we started this project, there was none in our surveys, and now essentially every single site we go to, we find this tube-nosed goby. So that's a brand new species that's pushing its way into the ecosystem and the food chain, and there'll be kind of impacts that we would expect to see with that. Another one that's showing up is a tench, the top right. So those are some young of the year tench. Those are mostly spreading from the Montreal area upwards upstream. So there's not a lot of those yet, but they are showing up here and there in Lake St. Francis. And then through the use of environmental DNA, we've actually picked up their presence further upstream of the dam, the Moses Saunders Dam. So they've gotten past that somehow and are further upstream now. We can use this giant data set and we can say, okay, that's great. There's certain areas of the river where we see really high biodiversity. There's just lots and lots of species. What do we know about those habitats? What's good about those habitats that is resulting in that biodiversity? And how can we replicate that in other areas where we see really low biodiversity? And we also see those sites. We did some surveys late in the fall, and I think one of the survey sites we found one species, which is really, really weird to see in the St. Lawrence River. This was a site that was very close to the shipping lane, so could be some impacts from that. But there are many degraded habitats throughout the river. As I showed previously, a huge portion of Lake St. Francis shorelines have been hardened, for example. So we can use this to think about opportunities now with all this monitoring that we've done in collaboration with so many different partners. How can we use this massive monitoring data set now to do restoration work, to do take it to the next level? And that's what I'll talk about in the last part of this presentation is some newer projects that we've done in collaboration. And again, I'm just a spokesperson for these projects. These are really big teams. I tried to put in lots of pictures to show everybody that's involved because there's lots of different people helping with these. So we're leveraging everything we've learned from these projects, and I just want to highlight three of them. So the first one is a project funded by the Canada Nature Fund for Aquatic Species of Risk. This is a really big grant that the River Institute obtained back in 2023, and we're just coming to the end of it now this year. But this had various different components. You can see we're all carrying buckets. So those buckets were a big part of it, but we had different objectives for this project. We wanted to bring together lots of different data sets about species at risk. So part of the River Institute staff team was working on that. I'm going to be talking more so about the on-the-ground components of the project, where we did some different restoration activities. So these ones here, these best management plans. This first project I'm talking about, again, was part of a really big collaborative research team. Again, a big part of it was working with the environment program staff at the MCA, but we also worked with St. Lawrence Parks Commission was a really big part of this as well. So thank you to Sucrete and others that were helping with that, because some of our sites were on their properties. Local conservation authorities, the City of Cornwall as well. And then of course, Watersheds Canada, fantastic organization. And I think, we had a talk from Watersheds Canada talk last year. If you want to learn more about that, I highly recommend you look at that talk. It's on our River Institute website as well. So the scope of this project, we narrowed it down to 5 sites in the upper St. Lawrence River. We wanted to focus on areas that had species at risk that we knew about. And so we kind of narrowed it down to those. There's a bit of an art to this, where you have to pick sites where you can actually do something, because we have lots of sites that are owned privately that you can never predict what a homeowner might want to do in those cases, right? So that's always a consideration too, is what the accessibility of a site would be. And even when it's in theory a public site, there's still a lot of hoops and hurdles to navigate with that. But this kind of our criteria here, we wanted to make sure that they had known presence of species of risk. And we also wanted to incorporate the presence of muskellunge nursery sites wherever we could too. Muskellunge are the largest predatory fish in the St. Lawrence River. Their populations crashed in the early 2000s, very, very slowly rebuilding them. And so there's a lot of effort on looking at where the young of the year are located throughout the river, what nursery sites they are located at, and try to protect or enhance those sites. So those are some of our considerations. One of our BMPs, or restoration strategies, was to improve the river bottom at these 5 sites. So it's pretty simple. You just put gravel on the bottom, but you need a certain size gravel that would be appropriate to use for a species of minnow like the cutlet minnow that can actually pick it up. So it has to be a very specific size. I want to thank Larry at the City of Cornwall. The City of Cornwall helped donate a big pile of this gravel. And then, yeah, Pete Sunday built us a really beautiful stand and screen that we, different staff were using to wash. You have to wash all the gravel before you put it in the river because it's covered in dust, and you don't want to make things worse by trying to do a good thing. And then, of course, you need permission from various landowners and partners to be able to put the gravel in place as well. So you can see the River Institute and an MCA team here at one of the locations at Yellow Island working together to put that gravel in place. So we finished doing that last year, and so we're going to be looking at how that resulted in improved habitat. You can kind of see this is what the gravel looks like, of course, and then I just put a little video. Here we can see it's the bottom, if you call your attention, it's mostly plants and soft substrates. So if you're a fish that really does need gravel or some harder surface to use for your spawning or feeding or things like that, this is kind of in short supply in certain areas. So these are kind of these little oases of hard substrate. So we're trying to enhance the habitat by putting that in. Of course, they don't need more plants in some of these locations. The plants are doing just fine. And here's a picture. This is an amazing picture by our own Steph Hildebrand of a cullet minnow there. And you can see it's, it's probably looking either to pick an eye out of a fish that's getting too close or to pick up a piece of gravel. The other part of this project was, okay, we're improving the river bottom at these locations, but we also want to improve the shorelines. In a lot of cases, are showing these hardened shorelines. People have removed trees and shrubs. They've put in grass. They've implemented things, we're missing that resilience in these shorelines where, roots are holding the soils and sediments in place. And so we worked with Watersheds Canada and various other partners to do these plantings along different habitats. And you can see lots and lots of different volunteers we had. In some cases, the top photo there, that's some of the environmental technician students at St. Lawrence College that were helping with that at one of our sites at the St. Lawrence College campus. And then this is a site working with Watersheds Canada again along the Long Sault Parkway, working with the St. Lawrence Parks Commission. And then this is a site just sort of downstream of the Moses Saunders Dam that's on the St. Lawrence Seaway Authority owned location. So we put all these plants in place. Plants take a long time to grow in some cases, but we tried in a lot of cases to put trees in place that would grow and create shade and have this enhanced anchoring of the soils. So this will be something that I can revisit. Maybe my kids can revisit some year, and they'll be able to see some of these trees and know that a good thing was done. We know that there's lots of studies basically that submerged aquatic vegetation does enhance habitat like this. So again, lots of people have looked at that. So what you do when you put all these plants along the shoreline is you stop a lot of sediment from running off the landscape and into the water. And you do see that at some locations. I'm going to show you a picture coming up where you see a lot of sediment being pulled from the shoreline, and you can't see the bottom of the river in these locations. So that's not great habitat for fish, and it causes siltation and covers up things. If a fish is trying to, spawn, for example, its eggs can get covered in sediment, and it could, have a really unsuccessful spawning event. So, and anchoring the shoreline with plants really prevents that runoff of sediment and soil, and it also prevents nutrients from running off as well that would prevent us from having these algal blooms, for example. And it generally results in much better aquatic habitat next to it. I mentioned one of the stressors of the river with climate change is that we have a warming river, right? So the water temperatures are rising. There's not a lot of good data on that though. So part of this project, we started to put in these water temperature loggers, and a couple of our staff came up with a really clever idea of using rocks to kind of hide them, because we don't want people to pick it up and say, what's this little disc here, and move it around. So we kind of had to hide them in different areas, but we have over 40 of them throughout the river, and they're in these near shore zones, and they're just logging temperature on a very rapid interval all day long, day after day, month after month. And if you plot that out, you get to see these kind of graphs like this, and this is really cool, right? So this is just temperature versus month, and you can see, of course, here's our coldest part of the year, and then it warms up again. And you can compare this year after year, and you can actually start to see well, in this zone here, we found these fish. And, you know, in the colder temperatures, if we were to visit again, maybe we don't find any of those fish, but we might find more cold tolerant fish in the winter in those near shore zones. So this is something that's, again, probably one of the biggest stressors that we're facing in the St. Lawrence River is in these near shore zones, warming water temperatures. A lot of fish are not tolerant of really, really warm water temperatures. In some cases, we'll measure something around 28 degrees, which is way too warm for most species. But some are tolerant to it, but most are, you know, kind of low 20s is the upper range for a lot of species. So yeah, so that, oops. We put these things in place, and now we have to revisit using all those FINS project monitoring techniques that I mentioned before. We're going to go back to all these sites. We're going to see how the plants are growing, what fish are using those gravel piles with, you know, just physically capturing the fish, but also looking at eDNA signals in the water around those gravel piles. And we'll be able to kind of inform future people that might be interested in using these techniques how effective they are, right? It's always important to evaluate these different techniques and not just take it at face value that they'll work. Our next project I want to talk about, another really big project. This was funded by the Canada Water Agency. So they have a grant called the Great Lakes Freshwater Ecosystem Initiative Grant. And essentially it covers the entire Great Lakes, and it's focused on using nature. Well, in this case, the focus of this grant was to use nature-based solutions to address erosional issues that are occurring throughout the Great Lakes. And that could be at massive beaches and some of the larger lakes, all the way to the St. Lawrence River and these connected waterways where, you know, there's different issues at play. So again, this is a project started in 2024, and we have one more year of this project. This project was focused on 2 sites, and we wanted to implement 2 different techniques of nature-based solutions at these 2 sites. So I'll be talking about that at these sites. So what's a nature-based solution? It's a solution that uses natural materials, so rocks and wood, in place of things like concrete and, you know, artificial materials and structures to more closely enhance these kind of green shorelines I was showing before. So we were evaluating 2 different techniques that there wasn't really a lot of scientific studies that have focused on them or provided evidence about how effective they are. So we're kind of field testing these 2 different nature-based solutions with this project. Again, really part of a big collaborative research team. It's the River Institute. We're working with engineers from the University of Ottawa, volunteers from the Great River Network, partners in Akwesasne and MCA, and several local conservation authorities. And I just tried to put in you know, we also had, as part of the Great River Network, divers. So Patricia's here today. Thanks, Patricia. We had several divers, you know, regulars there too, and Tom, but different divers that helped us install some of the equipment we needed to put into the river, the different instruments to help monitor for this project. And then we have to haul these instruments out at the end of the season as well. It's usually October, November. So it's always appreciative when we get volunteers or different staff that help with that. So what am I talking about? Well, here's the geographic scope of it. This is St. Lawrence River. So we have Cornwall here, then further upstream by Morseburg, we have Mariatown there. So that was where we put one of the structures in place. And then all the way down past Cornwall downstream at Point Mouillet was our other location where we put this nature-based solution in. We had a series of other sites that were close to the shipping lane, so we were monitoring that. But essentially, these sites were chosen because they were perceived to be being affected by excessive wake erosion. So ships coming by, causing these large waves to go up against the shoreline and potentially cause negative erosion. So they're ideal sites, and we had some really good partners for this in Mariatown. Chris Moran, who's a fantastic human being and part of the Great River Network. We couldn't have done this project without Chris, actually. He was amazing on it. So this is actually located at his property in Mariatown. You know, this property had experienced massive erosion over the last 40 or 50 years. You know, we were looking at pictures where the tree that was now on shore used to be way out, you know, way inland, but the shoreline's eroded all the point where it was close up to the tree. So It has experienced significant erosion, very close proximity to the shipping lane, so it's ideal to do this kind of work. So we put these sensors in the water, and the sensors monitor wave height as the ship comes by, or waves from wind or things like that. And the sensors also monitor when the water gets stirred up by these waves, so it's called turbidity, so the drop in the clarity of the water. So these sensors are put in place, and they take measurements every hour, I think, and they're just going for months and months collecting this data throughout the shipping season. At this location, we put a live crib wall in place. And a live crib wall essentially is a combination of riprap, but plantings on the top of it. And they're generally shaped with different tiered designs, so they more closely mimic a natural shoreline as opposed to a straight wall or just rock. So they incorporate the plantings and the roots that can help anchor the shoreline. Our second site was Point Mouillet. So this is a part of a wetland complex, a provincially significant wetland complex. If you look closely, you can see this large point of land that sticks out into the river is being eroded from underneath by wave action. This has been happening for decades, and if you look back through satellite imagery, you can see that the shoreline is receding. So it's a significant issue there. It's a natural shoreline, so it's not a hardened shoreline, which is nice, but it's it still needs some sort of enhancement or help to counter all the erosion that's taking place. So so this was the site where we wanted to do what's called ballasted woody debris, large sticks in the water, and I'll show you some examples of that. Before we did anything at these sites, we did aquatic habitat surveys using our fins methods. We saw what kind of fish were there, what the water quality is, the plants and the shoreline shape and everything like that. That's our baseline. And we use drones, so you can see this top-down view from the drone. You can see all the trees just falling in the water constantly, and they're just being undercut by these wave action. We installed, as I mentioned, these wave and turbidity loggers. So these were deployed in the summer, and we left them out through the summer into the fall. And at the end of the shipping season, we retrieved them. So again, we couldn't have done this work without the help from our volunteer divers. I don't know, Patricia, if that's you there, but that's probably you. But again, super appreciated. And one of the divers actually was a French bakery chef, and she would, Swiss, sorry. I didn't really care. It was just really good. She would bring really good snacks. So that was even more appreciated. But this is what the receiver looks like. So there's a stand there. Eventually they covered in algae. You have to clean them off periodically because your measurements go off. So again, relying on divers to come and help us do that. This is kind of a cross-section of the original plan of the live crib wall for the Mariatown location. You can kind of see that tiered design. That's what we wanted to do. And this was, again, a learning experience. We added all these idealized plans, and there's lots of, I won't get into too much, but there's lots of permitting involved to do all this work as well. So I'm going to take you through a series of pictures showing that from start to finish what the live crib wall looked like last year. So this is back in 2024, and you can see the shoreline, eroding. We're right up to the base of some of these giant willow trees. At some point, the shoreline's just going to keep going past them. So we have to do something here. And the shipping lane's fairly close to this location. So through some delays, this kind of work didn't actually start until March 2025. And this is kind of an initial go at it. So you can see the rip rock and this kind of tier design with logs that are anchored there. Then you put some soil in place and some matting in place. That didn't go too well. It was a high water level year. So that the toe end of this live crib wall started to erode fairly badly early on. The water levels were high in the spring. They continued to be high throughout the summer. So that was one of our lessons. So we actually had to return to the site, and Chris did a ton of work on this, Chris Moran. We also had some staff, that's Kate there, and a few others come back and, by hand, replace some of the rocks and help restructure these to be a little more stable. Again, it's a learning process as we go. So you can see a series of pictures here, and we have even some volunteer environmental technician students from the college. There's a Ren there too, yeah. Nolan, you can see, It's kind of progressing there. This is kind of the October fall version of what that looked like. So we have plantings along the top and then kind of a more rocky shape to it there. The other side of his property, this is what it looked like to start with. Again, you have these kind of gabions go in, these kind of cages where you put lots of rock in place, and then you're creating this kind of tiered design over time. You can see both the structures on each side there in progress. You have to put these, again, this is a really important part. If you're working on these projects, you know, these silt screens. Silt screens are really important because you have lots of runoff of soil that can contaminate your site. So that's an important thing to have. Again, more student volunteers from the college were helping with that. And you can see this kind of design take shape. And then again, this is the finished product in the fall. So we have plantings along the top. These are all different native species of shrubs and a combination of those and flowers that we're going to revisit this year. We'll see how they grew up. And then eventually a lot of this will be colonized down towards the water. So this will be and Chris has been really good about bringing some of the Conservation Authority staff, anyone that's interested to come and look at this. And I'm sure he'll continue, I don't want to speak for him, but he's been really great in sharing the results of that. So zooming all the way over downstream to Point Mouillet now, that's that shoreline where all the trees are eroding. We had to do something, again, nature-based solution using natural products. So the design we came up with was installing these large woody debris, essentially large trees with the root balls. You can see the root balls still there attached in place in the river, and we're angling them at a certain way that they will dampen the wave energy as it comes to shoreline. And they're anchored by these massive concrete blocks. And there's a bit of discussion with this project. Originally, we wanted to use large boulders, which would be a more natural product. But, you know, again, logistics, having boulders on a large barge that could potentially roll around, you have to drill into the rocks, you have to epoxy your fasteners in place, and concrete just ended up being a much more practical thing to use. So that's one thing we modified from our original plans. But we had this enhancement that we put on these. So you can see on the sides of these concrete blocks, these kind of textured panels that we obtained from Dr. Steve Cook's lab at Carleton. So they had done a study in the Rideau Canal, I believe, or the Aubra River, where they implemented these panels. And then they measured how many invertebrates and fish showed up next to these along hardened walls in the water. And they found that there was significant improvement. So we said, okay, we're going to stick these on a subset of our blocks as well. And we will also evaluate how these enhance maybe what could normally just be a really plain design of concrete block. So the reason we're putting these large woody debris, again, there's lots of research showing that woody debris in river systems is really important. It's that structure. It allows small fish to hide around, large fish to hunt around. And you know, it's really good for things like invertebrates as well. It also can improve water clarity because it slows water down, allows sediments to drop out of water. So lots of benefits of using it. This is the Point Mouillet. So you can see we used a barge to put all these in place. So West Front was the contractor that did this, and they're amazing to work with. Thank you, Brian and the team there for all the work they did on that. You can see, I don't know if I get out of the way here, you can see a different coloration in the water too. That's all those sediments being washed out from the shoreline and pulled out. So you can actually see the St. Lawrence River normally has a really clear water, but along this stretch of the river, you can't not see the bottom because of this erosion. So this was a big collaboration. Again, we had engineers designing, you know, the exact formation and the weighting of everything for these. So, you know, thanks to Greg and Dr. Colin Rennie at University of Ottawa and Arman Hajiji as well. Lots of engineers helped to come up with the best plan for this. And we worked really closely too with the Raisin Region Conservation Authority. So thanks to Brendan for being a big partner on this too. You can see the barge here in place. So we put a series of the trees there, and then they're lowered with a crane, positioned properly. And those were installed in the fall in October. So very recently. So we're kind of waiting now with bated breath to see, did they move with all this ice we have now? We're going to revisit those. We're going to take the positions. We measured very closely. You can see just a little drone video of the whole process there. If you bear with me, it does zoom out there. But again, through this drone video, you can see a lot of the shoreline that's eroding as well. And again, drones are just a really great way of capturing different project elements from a different perspective. But you can start to see this plume of sediment kind of emanating from the shoreline there, right? So it's a significant issue affecting this wetland, this swamp. So the trees are lowered in place there, and you can see in this drone image map here, all those points are kind of guiding you to where the trees are placed. So this coming summer, we're going to return to this, and spring and summer, we're going to put our sensors back behind this essential barrier of trees and then in front of it. And we're going to measure the wave energy and see if things have changed now. And we're also going to do some surveys and look at what kind of fish have shown up, if the water quality's improved and things like that. And there's just some views of that. So that's our plan coming up for this summer. This is a really, really big project again, fairly large budget. To do any of this type of work takes a lot of money, unfortunately. I don't know if anyone knows what the going rate for a barge is, but it's not cheap, and very few options to do that work as well. And the last project I want to cover is kind of focused more on the shoreline. So improving these riparian zones, these planted shorelines that'll benefit the adjacent aquatic habitat. So this is a project that's funded by of several things actually, but the Eco Action Community Funding Program. We also had funding from the Invasive Species Center as well to work on this. But this was focused at Rotary Creek. So Rotary Creek has this really bad issue of invasion from Phragmites, which is a tall grass. You can see it in the background here. And it basically creates a monoculture that really impacts the diversity of an environment. And so we implemented this best management practice of going in and physically removing the Phragmites from this location. This involved not only River Institute staff, but MCA staff, a whole host of volunteers, also some from the Great River Network. And we did mapping and surveys before and after as well. We're trying to promote awareness of Phragmites in the Cornwall community. So we created these volunteer events. We have more coming up this summer and fall, hopefully. So if you want to get out there and pitch in, you're always welcome. Just bring yourself. We have everything else you need. But usually it's in a 2-hour block or so. We kind of go super intense on removing the Phragmites. Phragmites regrows though, so we need to keep at this. We need to keep going back and removing it. You're not currently allowed to use chemical methods in the City of Cornwall limits to control Phragmites, so it has to be by things like physical removal like this. In some other areas, for example, Conservation Authority areas, they are using chemicals to control Phragmites. So lots of different events. You can see just that tall grass all along, go down to Rotary Creek, you'll see it firsthand. We've done a lot of plantings after we've removed the Phragmites. You can see large teams there. We worked with Watersheds Canada as well. The main goal here is putting in trees. So maybe in 10 or 20 years, hopefully if this works, there'll be lots of nice water tolerant trees shading out this area. And Phragmites does not like growing under the shade of trees. So this is kind of our natural solution for this area. So we're hoping that works. And we're just kind of revisiting this constantly and trying to give the trees a hand up by clearing away the Phragmites from them. So again, we'll be continuing this post monitoring at this site, and lots of opportunities to help out with that. Okay, lots of different projects. This is, since I've worked at the River Institute, this is the most we've done in terms of shoreline restoration work with all these different projects on the go. And across all of them, we've learned a lot of different lessons. One is that it's a really complex permitting environment. So if you want to do fish surveys, for example, what fish are in the environment? You need fish collection permits. You need permits from the province that you operate in. If you're working in Akwesasne, you need one from Akwesasne. If you are dealing with species of risk, you need one from the federal government. And that can take time. We've gotten good at getting those permits. So that's just a touch of fish. You need lots and lots of different permissions for the River Institute at least. And then if the work takes place on private property versus public property, you need to get permissions in terms of that. If you're going to be building any structures or enhancing any shoreline structures, you need to consult with conservation authorities that have some jurisdiction there. If you're putting any structures in place in the water, like we did with our large woody debris, you then also need permission from Transport Canada. They want to make sure you're not putting things in place that'll affect vessels, recreational craft going by, and somebody hits their their boat engine, their prop on the bottom or something where they weren't expecting to hit something. So you need a comment period like we did with our Point Mouillet project where you put out this permit and you allow the public to comment on it, and people can if they want to. And so lots and lots of different layers and permissions before you're allowed to do anything, which is, again, why we were doing things in the fall, because we had to wait. Also, you're not allowed to do some of these activities during sensitive times for fish. So if fish are spawning, for example, you have to do activities outside that spawning. We can't do these projects without the help of volunteers. If it was just a River Institute staff, a ragtag team, like I was showing some of those pictures, we can't do these projects by ourselves. And in particular, the erosion project, we could not have done that without Chris Moran's help. So huge thanks to Chris Moran for that. But we had lots of other volunteers, our divers, Dale Phippen, and lots of others that were working with our contractors. They were on site at critical times too. So just it's a really important lesson we had, and especially with different volunteers. Having contractors that have a little bit of experience was also really helpful in a lot of cases. And we're excited to share the post-installation, post-restoration results with people as well. This is all kind of fresh projects right now, so stay tuned. We will be releasing, if you follow us on social media, you can look there to see some of the results. We'll be sharing some of those coming up. Lots of different, and I highlighted 3 projects that the River Institute has done. There's lots of ongoing shoreline restoration work that's being done by lots of other organizations. The MCA has worked with Watersheds Canada, a number of shoreline projects as well. Watersheds Canada is super busy. They're an amazing organization. If anyone, if you have private property that you're interested in doing some restoration work, I highly recommend you reach out to them. They have really good recommendations on enhancing shorelines with different types of plantings, and they can work with you. So just to say that, the 3 projects that I just mentioned are taking place within a broader network of other projects on the go. So it's really nice to see that. We're hoping that the things we learn are scalable, that we can replicate them in other areas. We're sharing this with government organizations so that, they can maybe make recommendations for others to use these methods, especially the nature-based solutions. We're filling in these knowledge gaps. Do these strategies work or not? There's not a lot of good science on that yet, so that's what we're trying to do with these projects. And just providing opportunities for the public to learn, like right now, but there'll be opportunities for people to visit the locations, and especially Rotary Creek, that's a really easy one to visit, and to see on-the-ground restoration work taking place and opportunities for people to participate. I've just put a few contacts here, there's a lot more, but some of the key ones, I encourage you to visit these different websites if you want to learn more about these projects as well. And again, I'm a spokesperson. All these projects are very large collaborations amongst dozens of people, and just thank you for everyone that's helped out with them. And that's my time. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Matt. Now we can open up the floor to any questions anyone has.
Thank you, Elaine Kennedy. Point Mouillet is it's not a point, it's a curved, long shoreline area. What portion of it have you managed to put these woody debris along, and do you plan on doing more if this works in the future?
That's thanks, Elaine. Thanks for coming to the talk tonight. I'll show you a picture here, this map. Let's see if I can find it. Right. Yeah, this one here. Yeah. So this is kind of the easternmost tip of the point there. And we've actually placed sensors measuring wave energy and turbidity along the length of this. But yeah, the structure is kind of where that barge is located. Yeah. And this is, a kilometer long section of shoreline, and we're doing several hundred feet. So we would need to scale it up considerably, but I don't want to go into the budget for this, but it's a little limiting to consider, doing this. But on smaller scales, this could work really well as well. And we're still expecting to see some results. The reason we chose this area is because it kind of expected to have the most erosional impact at the tip. And there's a wetland that's right around the corner there where a lot of the debris from this, all the trees, the sediments is getting swept down. So we're hoping to see some improvements around the corner of the point as well.
Hi. Definitely didn't have a chance to connect with you, but this was so wonderful. I just want to say, I was actually interested in the wave energy. If they've started to publish on that data, is there any point? Like, are they going to do that? Just because I feel like that could be a really good input for a model to estimate like vulnerability, considering like you're kind of differentiating between the big ships going by as well as sort of like the smaller local traffic, right?
Exactly. That's a great question, Abe. We had some engineers from University of Ottawa kind of more focused on the wave energy component of the project. And one of them, he's now graduated. He has his PhD, but Arman Hajiji is an engineer. He was an engineering PhD, and he worked on this project for his PhD under supervision of Dr. Colin Rennie, who's a hydrodynamic engineer at the University of Ottawa. So Arman has now published at least one study based on some of the modeling that was done at this location, and also at Chris Moran's location, using the information from these sensors. And a really interesting thing that came out of that was that it looks like the ship wake energy actually wasn't super significant. There was much more wind energy, and it seemed to be, if I'm remembering this correctly, and Jeff, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but several larger storm events seem to be a lot more significant in terms of the erosion that occurred versus kind of regular ship energy. Not to discount that that's not important as well, but within the timeline of the project, we had one storm in the winter that's just eroded the shoreline half a foot almost in one case. So Armand's published some of that modeling work, and he's having he'll have at least 2 more publications coming out, I believe, on that as well. So, yep. I can send you the links if you want. Yeah, happy to do that. If you want to peruse the math behind it, be my guest. Yeah.
Is there any more questions anyone has?
Make sure to walk me. Feel free to walk by before I ask. Hey Matt, this is a great talk. I was curious to, you mentioned a little bit, right? The eDNA laboratory is looking to be online here soon. I was just wondering, did you guys have an idea of what your vision is for what kind of work your eDNA lab is interested in looking at? Are you guys mostly looking at interested in like assemblage, monitoring, presence, absence, or you're also interested in looking at specific experimental designs around the ecology of eDNA and other specific aspects of it as relation to specific species, in addition to just broader scale community data?
You've clearly been thinking about this a lot, and that's those are all.
Yeah. Sorry, that was not the easiest one to finish up on.
Those are all amazing suggestions and potential areas of research and focus. It's kind of evolving right now. Like the FINS project I mentioned is the main way we're using eDNA right now. So that's mainly focused on fish assemblages, and now we're also looking at individual species of interest, like species of risk, with quantitative PCR. Our new laboratory will be set up for quantitative PCR, but then we have all these great relationships with Queen's University and others, where we can do metabarcoding, for example, and look at the full assemblage of fish or invertebrates or even plants. So the sky's the limit a little bit, and we're hoping with we're evolving our plan for the new labs. One area of growth is potentially working with people and doing kind of fee for service. So if someone would like to use eDNA, then we can help them collect samples or go do that for them and then kind of analyze what's in them. And then kind of trying to integrate it more and more with our projects. And we've had discussions, Brian and myself, I think, with looking at stomach contents of different animals. And Brian's already published some eDNA research on stomach contents of bats, for example. So it doesn't have to be limited to the aquatic environment at all. anyone that's ever sorted through stomach contents of a fish, it's really not, it's just a mush, right? So if you can just take a sample and then see what species are in there, that's another cool application too. But another really cool thing we want to do is interpreting eDNA signals, right? This is a flowing system. You take a water sample, great. That water could have originated kilometers upstream, and so you don't know if that's a local signal or not. So pairing the eDNA with modeling of river water movements and flows, I think is going to be a really important next step for us too to help interpret what we're seeing. And I think it'll be a really good tool to use. I don't think it'll ever replace physically catching fish. You just get a lot more information out of physically catching them. Where eDNA really shines is that you pick up more species. We've done studies with Queen's University where we've collected water samples, right where we've done fishing, and we've compared the number of fish detected with both methods. And eDNA detects more fish every single time. But you don't, again, were those fish locally there? Did the water come from up above, and further upstream? What were the size of the fish? Was it a big fish that floated by, or was it hundreds of small, young of the year of the same species? So lots of kind of gray areas still with eDNA, but I think it really is a really critical tool for presence absence, especially. We need to talk more though, yes.
Yes.
As a non-scientist, what I hear in what both of you were saying is it's your imagination of where you can use it is just going to expand day by day and month by month in the next few years. That's what I hear.
And we have very good imaginations, so yes. Yeah, and to your point, Elaine, I think if people have suggestions to or ideas, or if they want to come to us, we're very open to working with the public, because this could be a really great tool to help people learn. It's already been applied in some cases to see if there's species of risk in wetlands that are potentially being developed, for example, or things like that, where it might be hard to find a species physically, but the eDNA can give you a signal that way too. So lots of potential to work with the public. Jeff.
And when you were asking your question, Elaine's answer was, I think the answer is yes. Yeah, I think that's really cool. And to that point, there are so many different intersections of technologies that can come together to answer new questions. One of which was that you've talked a little bit about your drone work, Matt. But one of the things that we thought about was the using of drones to sample hard to access locations and grab water samples, and then using DNA to see what was in that water. So that's a kind of an interesting one as well. So it is really a matter of just being limited by your imagination.
Yeah.
That's right.
We worked with a researcher on that, Dr. Hugh Liu at University of Toronto, who's an aeronautics engineer. And he had a student, and they had a much larger drone than we do, and they figured out how to dangle a sample bottle from a rope, and they had to kind of control, because if you pick up a liter of water, that's a lot of weight, and it can swing as the drone moves, and the drone can crash. So they had to kind of figure out how to control the drone with this kind of dangling water sample, and how to safely lower it and grab a water sample. But they did figure it out. So instead of a crew climbing into a boat and having to lug a boat and launch a boat, and wouldn't it be great if you could just drive up to a shoreline, hook this up, go take your water sample offshore? Even like more, again, sky's the limit imagination, a series of drones. You could have a series of drones all collecting water samples, and you would say simultaneously, here's a signal here, 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 and you could compare that across your site too. We all see these kind of drone shows now where there's thousands in the sky and different shapes. So I like to think about maybe a smaller scale version of that, but a lot of drones collecting water on the river simultaneously. So we have 2 drones. If someone else wants to join up and we could combine drones, we can maybe try that out at some time.
More on the DNA, and this is high-flying imagination. What about human DNA?
Human DNA too, yeah.
So with the lab, you're going to have, you would have methods, protocols to detect it?
Yep. Doesn't matter what species. The important part is that you need to figure out the sequence of the DNA. So it could go anywhere from a virus or a bacteria all the way to, pick any species on Earth. As long as you know the sequence of the unique snippets of DNA that are unique to that species, you can compare to your sample. You can test any species.
So maybe there could potentially be some potential benefits in exploring that. I don't know.
There could,
In
yeah.
your downtime.
Well, one interesting usage of it during the last couple of years has been monitoring COVID in effluent. So that's kind of how they're getting a sense of, sometimes in populations in cities, what the, local infection rate is by looking at that. So,
Yeah, I'm thinking revenue generation here, maybe.
All right, so I do have a question online from Jared. So while ice fishing Hoople Bay this season, I have noticed an unusual abundance of juvenile walleye. This is a really encouraging sign. Is this the result of a highly successful spawning season, or has there been a stocking program put in place?
That's a good question. I've seen some of the pictures from Hoople Bay from people catching the young of the year walleye, and that's really good to see, because I know there's been a lot of concern on just the low population of walleye in the Hoople Bay area. So, there's no definitive answer for that. I think it's definitely possible that there was a good, successful spawning season. As I mentioned earlier, it was a higher water level year this year. So generally that benefits fish, having more water supply. It improves access to locations and water flow and things like that. So it's possible. As far as I'm aware, there's been no stocking by the Ontario government at all. So if there was stocking, it could be from, I don't know, Tiernan, if you're aware of any walleye stocking. Yeah, I'm not aware of any locally. So it's possible there might have been, but yeah, it most likely is just a successful year for spawning.
Okay, perfect. We are running out of time, so thank you so much again, Matt, for the presentation. That's a great highlight of all of our summary at the River Institute for the Restoration projects. Okay, and then please come back for February 19th as Kate's presenting freshwater mussels. And thank you for coming.